It's finally time to take a first look at the latest retrofit smart lock which has just been released, the SwitchBot Lock Pro. I'll discuss all of the different ways you can unlock it, its new features and of course its weaknesses. I'm also going to show you some of the installation so that if you buy this lock then you can come back to this video later. 9 months ago I did a video about the SwitchBot lock on my front door for the 9 months that I used it, and the verdict was that it was pretty decent for a retrofit smart lock. Thankfully, 9 months on, my opinion hasn't changed and it's still going strong. This new version is called the SwitchBot Lock Pro, so today we're going to find out if it lives up to its Pro name and if it's worth the upgrade. It's still the same concept, designed for fitting onto doors whereby if you can't or don't want to change the entire lock mechanism for an integrated smart lock. Pairing it with the KeyPad Touch is a must in my opinion, and we'll be taking a look at that as well as their new Hub Mini, which you may or may not need depending on what you've got already in the SwitchBot range and whether you plan to connect it to other smart home platforms such as Apple Home, Home Assistant, etc. So let's take a look and see how it got on. So looking at the locks side by side, there's an obvious difference. Instead of the manual turning mechanism of the previous one, you now have a dial with a button in the middle. Although you don't need to change batteries very often, the new one has a more accessible magnetic battery compartment, which I think is a good improvement. They have ditched the two CR123A batteries that the previous version needed, and they've opted for AA batteries instead, which I think is a great change because most people have AA batteries lying around. You can also buy a separate rechargeable battery pack, allowing you to charge one whilst the other one is in use. Unlike the last SwitchBot lock, which I bought myself, SwitchBot did send me this one to test. And because this is a newly released product, this video is going to be more about the functionality and the setup. Let's take a look at what is included in the box. You get the lock itself, of course, and then a couple of boxes including all of the accessories. One of the boxes contains an instruction booklet, the door sensor magnet, which knows whether the door is open or not, and the bits and bobs for the mounting of the lock. The other box contains the two mounting bracket options and some doorknob attachments. So now let's get into the installation. There are so many different lock types, it's probably more challenging developing a retrofit lock than an integrated smart lock. But I would say that SwitchBot has done a pretty decent job of trying to case for all the different setups. There are two different brackets provided. Bracket A is a really nice installation process because the entire lock can be added and removed really quickly without the need for sticking it to your door like the previous version required. You need to have at least 3mm of the lock shaft sticking out of the door for this to work, because it uses that to grab onto it with 3 little screws. It feels really quite secure when it's installed like this. If your lock sticks out by less than 3mm, then you're going to need to use bracket B instead, which involves sticking the lock to the door like the previous version did. If you have a long handle surrounding, like I do, then it means sticking it to the handle itself. I was a bit worried that there wouldn't be enough surface area of the lock sticking to the handle, but actually the VHB tape that they use is so strong that I think it's going to be more than sufficient. I do think that SwitchBot maybe could have created a slightly more flexible bracket, maybe something like where it grabbed onto the surrounding of the handle itself, and I will be feeding this back to SwitchBot. Sticking it to your door makes it a slightly tricky task to remove it later on, although you shouldn't be needing to do this very often. As you can see here, when I was removing the old lock, a hairdryer and a bit of WD-40 should get your lock back to normal, but this did take me 20 minutes or so to do. The inside of my door has a knob for opening it rather than the key. In the old version I was able to leave this knob on and the SwitchBot lock itself was able to turn the knob. Unfortunately for the new version the knob was too big, so instead I had to remove the knob with an Allen key and then use one of the 8 included attachments. This wasn't too much of a problem, but it was just a little extra step I had to do versus the old one. Once the knob attachment was on, it was just a case of cleaning the door with the included wipes and then sticking the bracket to the door. I also cleaned the door with isopropanol first, just to ensure that all of the old sticky stuff and the WD-40 was off the door. You then just slide the lock over the bracket and then add the 2 screws either side. The only thing left to do for installation is to add the blue tape to help the lock stick to the door, which you should leave on for a day or two. This is just while the VHB cures. And then you need to add the magnet to the side, which tells you whether the door is open or closed. And that's it, the installation is complete. So now we can go into the SwitchBot app and set it up there. You'll need to create an account if you don't already use the SwitchBot app, and then go to the plus icon in the top right and click Add Device. The first thing it'll ask you to do is to remove the tab from the battery cover, and then it should discover your lock via Bluetooth. It's probably then going to ask you to do a firmware update, which took less than 30 seconds for me. Then give your device a name and assign it a room. If you have a SwitchBot Hub 2 or the new Matter-enabled Hub Mini, then it will give you the option to enable cloud services, but we'll come on to that later. It then gives you an installation guide if you haven't already installed the lock like we have. Then just follow the instructions where it will get you to lock and unlock it a couple of times, and this is for the calibration of the lock. It will then also ask you if you've got a night latch, which requires you to use your key to unlock the door even if it's already unlocked from the outside, but otherwise just select the other option. I found this process really quick and easy, and then you can start using the lock either manually or with the app. It also has an option to share with someone else so that they can open your door using the app when they are close to your door. I'll be honest, I haven't tried this feature though because there are so many other ways to unlock the door, especially when you have the KeyPad Touch, which is the next thing we're going to look at. The KeyPad Touch goes on the outside of the door, allowing you to either use a code, fingerprint or NFC card to unlock the door. This product isn't new and can be paired with the previous version of the lock as well, which I think is really nice because if you're moving from the old lock to the new lock and you've already got this, then you can still use it and don't need to go out and buy a new keypad. The keypad does take the less common CR123A batteries, but it comes with a pair of them in the box, so you're probably not going to need to change them for at least a year or two. Mine is still on 50% after over a year. The box includes a bracket which allows you to either stick or screw the keypad to the outside of your house, and it comes with an NFC card as well so that you can use that to open your door. Given all of the other opening options, I feel that one NFC card is enough, but if you want more then you're going to need to buy them separately. The bracket itself closes two contacts on the back of the keypad as a tamper alert, allowing it to beep if someone removes the keypad. It's also IP65 rated, so there shouldn't be an issue with it being outside. Mine is under a porch, so it doesn't get much exposure to rain, but I've had no problem with it so far. Because I was using the keypad with the old lock, I can confidently say that it's been nice and reliable for me after a year of daily use. The only downside is that a slightly dirty or wet finger does make it more difficult for it to recognise your fingerprint, and the keypad locks itself for 1 minute after 5 invalid attempts, and increases this lock duration on subsequent failures. I personally think that you should be able to increase the number of failed attempts, but at the moment you can't do that, so you just have to go into the app and then re-enable the keypad. So finally moving on to the integrations, for this lock they have brought out a new mini hub which is Matter enabled. Unfortunately if you have that old original hub mini then it's not going to work with this lock, which I think is a shame. Your other option is the hub 2 which is already Matter enabled and has a few extra sensors, so if you already have this one then you're going to be good to go. I really do think they should have called it the Hub Mini 2 or something, because if you look at the boxes then you can see that the names and the boxes look almost identical to each other. As with our other hubs, it has the ability to control infrared devices such as TVs or air conditioning units. There isn't much in the box, just a hub, USB-A to USB-C cable and a sticky pad, so you will need to plug it into some form of USB socket or power adapter to power it. Once you have the hub set up in the app, then you can go back into the lock and it will ask you to pair it with the hub. You'll then want to go back into the settings of the hub and select Matter Setup to pair it to other ecosystems using the Matter pairing code or a QR code. This will allow you to pair it with your Matter platform of choice, whether that's Google, Amazon, Apple Home, or perhaps Home Assistant. For the Home Assistant users out there, it's worth noting that it doesn't work with Bluetooth proxies at the moment like the old one does. You shouldn't buy a product on a promise, but I'll be very surprised if this functionality doesn't get added fairly quickly, especially as the old lock is supported. And if you do have a SwitchBot hub, then you can connect it to Home Assistant via Matter in the meantime. There are a couple of things to note about the Matter setup process. The first thing is that for Matter to work successfully, you need to have all of your devices on the same network and the same VLAN. I also found that I needed to have my phone on the same Wi-Fi SSID as well for it to work with Home Assistant. Assistant. And the other thing I noticed is that the lock status doesn't always seem to update straight away. Sometimes it took up to a couple of minutes to update the status correctly in Home Assistant, even when I perform the action of locking the door from Home Assistant. This makes me think that the issue is more likely to be SwitchBot not sending the status back to Home Assistant rather than the issue being with Home Assistant, but I could be wrong. Also, currently it only shows the lock status itself. You can't see, for example, the battery life or whether the door is open or closed. I find that the Matter setup processes with these ecosystems are still a bit buggy, so I'm hoping that in 2024 things for Matter devices are going to get better. Well, firstly, if you made it this far through the video, then thanks, and please give the video a like if you haven't already. Now that I've covered the lock, the keypad and the hub, let's summarise what I like and dislike about it so far. If you want to get all three items, then I think the cost is a bit high, but having said that, SwitchBot often does offers, so definitely keep your eye out, and I'll leave my best coupon code in the description, which will probably be an affiliate link, and it will really help support the channel. Their pre-release offer in the UK was £60 off, meaning that you got all three devices for £179.99, which I think is a pretty decent price, particularly as the hub works with all their other SwitchBot range, such as the SwitchBot Bot and the SwitchBot curtains. So is this lock worth an upgrade from the previous version? Well, maybe. When I showed my missus the new version, she was very happy that the knob rotation had been replaced with a push of a button. She also thinks that it looks slightly nicer, particularly as we don't have to use the additional bracket. It doesn't really add any additional functionality over the previous one, but if you don't already have the original, then I think it makes total sense to go for this one instead of the original one. But if you do have the original version, then it really comes down to if the new functionality is good for you or not, and also whether you need to buy a new SwitchBot hub. One thing that I think is a really big miss on this lock is not supporting Apple Home Key. Although there are a crazy amount of options for unlocking your door with this lock, I think being able to use this for some people with an Apple Watch is a really big one, especially as more of its competition is starting to support it. Well, hopefully this should give you a good enough idea of whether you're interested in this lock or not. And if you're not in a rush to buy it now, then be sure to check out my video update in a few months' time on how it's going. Well, that's it for today, so please consider subscribing if you haven't already, liking the video if you enjoyed it, and thanks until next time.